It's like unbelievable.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of roads. Great view. You might have to put another road charger there, so great.
Is this a long time? How are you, Andrea?
Hey, Greg.
You know Greg, please? It's going to be okay. I'll just take out time.
I have nothing.
I'll probably just give it a minute or two in case people are so it's not the easiest for you to get into.
Like a few weeks later, I'm like, hopefully.
I didn't really tell.
Yeah.
I still think okay, so I may as well get started now. There might be a couple of people coming in as we go, but I'm Rachel. I'm a graduate intern in the Disability Service, and I have invited you here to talk about disability inclusion in student services or student offices in the college, mainly student-facing roles. So a lot of what this will touch on is kind of the ways you interact with students, and that obviously looks different for every office. So I wanted to start off with kind of some background to disability in Trinity in case you're unfamiliar. So 10.1% of the Trinity students are connected with the disability service. And I think what's really important to think about this is if you think about your own work and how many students you interact with, 1 in 10 of those statistically has a disability. But maybe when you think of a disability, you probably don't think every 10th person you see has a disability, because most of them are invisible. And a lot of the guidelines that I developed, they're 3 booklets. They're kind of focused on universal design, so looking at ways that you can make your work inclusive to students, regardless of whether you know they have a disability. In almost every case, you won't. So that's kind of the idea behind this. There's obviously things like physical access that's really important, but the majority of people you interact with might have a disability you don't know, and you probably in most cases you won't find out. So going on from that, the most common cohorts this year to applying for support with us and coming through the DARE system were mental health, ADHD, ADD, and a specific learning difficulty, which are all invisible. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of diversity of disability. There is obviously visible disabilities as well, but they're much less common. And a lot of the time people are more familiar with how to interact or how to make yourself accessible and inclusive for those people. And just for to kind of give an idea of what policies are in place to support students, the reasonable accommodation policy is it's a Trinity policy that outlines the rights and responsibilities of disabled students in Trinity, and that's available online. It was just updated. So yeah, that's for some context. So there's 3 booklets, and I'm going to take each one and kind of give like a bit of a quick summary of what's involved in each one. There's a lot of information in the booklets, but the idea is that this will give you an idea of what's in them and maybe where they might be useful, because the reason we divided them up is because, you know, the work people do is quite diverse. So maybe someone does more communication, someone else would be sitting at a front desk, and things like that. I did make similar ones for student societies previously, and they were useful, but I think for this context it made sense to break it up into these 3 sections. So to start thinking about how you interact with students and how that can become more inclusive to disabled students, I wanted to just pose the question of how do you interact with students. So I have some examples in ways like in-person meetings are probably the most common for us anyways. There's also email, phone calls, online meetings, pre-arranged meetings, and drop-in or service desk interactions. Is there anyone else who interacts with students in a way that isn't on the screen, or like maybe that's a bit different? I was thinking probably social media would be one, yeah, that I don't have there. But yeah, these are kind of the idea is that they're just like day-to-day interactions you have that you probably aren't thinking in that situation, how do you become more inclusive to disabled students? So in the booklet, they go into more details, but just for some general tips to kind of give you an idea of what you should be thinking about. So when you're booking meetings, before meetings, students will be booking a meeting, or they'll be, planning to come in, whether it's for a drop-in. It's important to give people the option to book online, because for a variety of reasons, if there is, like maybe phone call bookings only, or a kind of a situation where you can't just show up or something like that, giving the option to book online means that people maybe who struggle with the phone, or people who are hard of hearing, have the chance to still attend and not be kind of intimidated by that early process. Because I think a lot of times people just think of when the student is physically in there, but for them it starts obviously before that. Something else is sending meeting reminders. I hope you find that particularly important when it's busy, and students might make an appointment like 3 weeks beforehand at the busiest time, which is not ideal, but it does happen. Or even for their own availability, to have a meeting reminder either through email or through like text or something like that. I know we have built into the system we use for bookings, there's an email reminder that goes out the day before. So that's another important thing, because a lot of students have so much going on, and I think I know that we're kind of like, how can you miss an appointment? You're booked in, but you were such a low priority for them most of the time. And also, of course, offering different formats for meetings. So whether that's online, or having the option to have a kind of formal one-on-one private meeting, or a meeting in a more communal space. So yeah, that's before the meeting takes place. In terms of inside the meeting, an obvious one would be having an accessible waiting room and a meeting area. So obviously that your space is accessible, and that if it's not, that you're advertising that it's not, and to give people the option to request an accessible space if possible. Something that we particularly have found coming into a new building that people don't know where it is giving clear directions. So I sent around a video showing you how to get here. Hopefully it was useful. But we send that around to students, so we give clear directions on how you come into the service. And that's really important, because a lot of people, it would be their first time coming into a new building, or they might have forgotten, especially after COVID and things like that. In a waiting room, from a sensory perspective, it's best to keep those quite quiet and calm, particularly avoiding loud music or loud radios and things like that. And understanding that some people might wear headphones in a waiting room if they are sensory sensitive to sound. That's just something else someone might do. So if someone doesn't respond to you when you come in and you say their name, it might be because they have headphones on and they're avoiding the sound. And yeah, understanding different communication styles. I guess this is more so for people who would maybe be at the front line of interaction, or in general, but a lot of times people might come in and they'll be really nervous, and not kind of being generally just polite and nice to people can really go a long way. A lot of students, if they go into a place and they find that they get a standoffish response, chances are they won't come back. And particularly if they do have certain disabilities like anxiety or autism, but also if they've been, particularly for disabled people, they're most likely to have engaged with a lot of support before and might have a negative experience in a certain support. But then if they get a slightly negative experience in this support, they'll never come back, because, so it's just a kind of general life advice, just be nice to people, but it does make a big difference. And then following up, which I think is something people would probably skip over, because especially at busy times, but giving information on how to book another session is really important, because sometimes people they don't know how to do that, or they might intend to but then forget. Ensuring that the student got what they wanted from the meeting, and that they left feeling more satisfied with their question or their support than they came in. And also giving a clear list of actions in an email, like a short summary email, to say, this is what we talked about today, for students, because, you can be sitting there for an hour and you might not have much knowledge of what was discussed afterwards, but you would in the meeting. So, for example, people come in for drop-in in our service, and we will send an email saying, here's what you talked about, here's the links discussed and things like that. So it goes a long way, and it's really useful for people who might, struggle with organisation, or, might be likely to disengage after that. So now, after briefly covering that, onto inclusive environments, and there's a lot to an inclusive environment, but the two things that I picked out on particularly for this for these booklets were the physical and sensory environment. So I wanted to ask you a question: what makes a space physically accessible, or what do you think? If anyone wants to, have an idea, have a guess. There's some obvious ones, so feel free to mention those too.
For the entrance.
Yeah.
Having steps.
Yeah, having like an entry level or a lift or something like that. Yeah. Is there anything else that?
Signs.
Yes, good job. Yeah, having clear signage as well is really important, and directions around the place. So I have this this image that kind of I've been using to show how, like, what the different components of an accessible space. So these are obviously, this is not the full and every single element of physical access, but to give, obviously there's the entry level and level entrance or a lift if that's not possible, or a ramp. But also once you get into the building, it still needs to be accessible. So things like clear pathways. So if someone was either a wheelchair user or visually impaired, that they're not going to come into any obstructions while they get into the building. So sometimes one of the issues there would maybe be like tables that are just like laid out in a way, or chairs. That means you can't navigate the space in a clear way. Another thing would be, as you mentioned, clear signage. So showing where the rooms are, how many levels there are, where the bathrooms are, and on that note, accessible facilities. Something people often forget when it comes to physical access is there an accessible bathroom or changing room or whatever is appropriate for that situation. And then of course elevators and just a way to get between the levels, and for that to be really clear. So this is useful when you're considering your own space that you operate in, and if you're hosting an event, or just to have some sort of statement on your website or something like that saying what the accessibility of the space is, because obviously in Trinity there are spaces that aren't accessible, but it's important just to be upfront about that if you are having an event or any sort of interaction with a student. Because the worst case scenario, someone comes and they can't get in when they thought they could. It's better for them to know that they can't get in advance. But yeah, so that's a kind of brief overview of that. And then in terms of sensory systems and what is the sensory environment, so TCD Sense is a project you might know that is run by the Disability Service, but they have a lot of resources that I'll talk about in a second. But a sensory system is essentially, so everyone has like a unique sensory system regardless of whether you have a disability or not. They're kind of they're associated with particularly neurodiversity and mental health conditions, that people might be particularly sensitive to a certain sensory input. But everyone does have a sensory system. For example, if someone sits down on a chair, you might think, oh, this isn't a comfortable chair, or it is a comfortable chair. That's a sensory response. So the TCD Sense project looks at the whole college environment, not just for disabled students. So that's kind of where we're coming from this. But there's a lot of sensory considerations to make when you have a meeting and things like that. So to give a bit more information on what a sensory is, or what a sensory system is, obviously sight, sound, taste, touch, smell are kind of obvious ones. Vestibular and proprioception, I can never pronounce that one. They are kind of the forgotten ones, but they're really important. So, when you're thinking of a sensory system, there's sensory seeking and sensory avoiding behavior. So say if someone is sensory seeking for sound, they might listen to white noise, but they might avoid loud, kind of music or something like that. And taste, it might be someone who wants sensory input for taste, might really like spicy food, but might on the other side, someone might hate spicy food or eat the same food again and again. In terms of vestibular, it's kind of how your body moves around a space. So some people who might want to avoid that sense might be terrified of heights or hate the feeling of being high, but they might enjoy, on the other hand, if they're seeking that sense, they might like a rocking chair or like a beanbag of some kind that it's not as like a firm seat. And then proprioception is the feeling of your body and how it interacts with things around it. So some people might dislike, the sense of tight clothing or the sense of pressure, whereas other people might want like a weighted blanket, and that might be calming to them. So that's kind of what those mean. And obviously, there's situations where, because it is sense seeking and avoiding, no one is going to be perfectly happy all of the time, because someone might want what the other person hates. So that's kind of how it works. But we do have like some general tips. So particularly for meeting students, one of the things that we've adopted this service is having lighting options. So we have obviously our general roof lights, but then we also have lamps and the option to turn off the lights, or to have natural light as well. So things like that. And also students can, a lot of the time, you'll notice Declan got up to close the window because it was very loud. So students sometimes will be sitting in a meeting and there'll be a window open behind them and the noise will completely distract them and they won't be able to deal with what's going on in that meeting. So giving people the option to kind of say, do you want to close the window? Do you want the window open? Things like that is also really important. And it's a very small thing, but it makes a big difference. Checking in with students about the furniture. This depends if you have furniture options, but we've tried with the TCD Sense project to have a couple of different furniture options. So we'd have like beanbags and meeting rooms and things like that. And also having a quiet or respite space at an event. So if there's a big event, maybe something like a networking event, or if it was say like a sports event, having a space that people can go to take a break, regardless of whether they have a disability, it's just useful for everyone. And then just if you want to find out more about this, the TCD Sense project has a lot of information about what they've done around the college. So like some of the spaces in the library and things like that, and that you can find out at the Linktree, which is just Linktree/TCD Sense. And there's more information in the booklet as well. So now on to the final section, communications, documents and digital content, which is my favorite part because I love digital accessibility. I'm going to start with social media accessibility. It might not be related to your role, but it's related to probably someone in your office's role. And it's important just for everyone to have a general awareness of this. So there's a couple of key elements. The first one is alt text or alternative text, which is a description of an image that goes in a HTML format. And then it's read out by a screen reader. Screen readers are basically devices, assistive technology devices that people with visual impairments use, and it reads out whatever the content is. So if this presentation was put into a screen reader, it would just read out the words and the image descriptions. So I have an example here of, say, this picture of Front Square at Trinity College Dublin. It's a bright day with a campanile in the background and two people walking along the grass. Two people, yeah. Anyways, the idea is that you just give the important pieces of the information. If it's a decorative image or if it's not needed, like say on this, the white box with the pink line is a decorative image. So I just mark that as decorative. But yeah, most social media platforms and things like Word docs and stuff like that have this function built into it. But yeah, it's good to just be aware of. And then captions is, another obvious one. They're just a text version of the speech that's included in video content. These are useful for people who are hard of hearing, but also for people who don't turn the videos on or the sound on when they're watching videos, which is a lot of people these days, particularly if they're out and about. So it's useful for everyone. I have some information in the booklets about, where you can find some resources to put captions in place, but it's really important whether it's an internal or an external video. If you're sharing a video with people in your workplace who might have visual or have a hearing impairment, you might not know, but also just for students and for anyone else viewing your content.
It's good for people who don't have a native language, like
yes, yeah,
English natively.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like that, most people, even now, if you're watching Netflix or something, will use captions, so it's very common. And then accessible text is something that people kind of forget about. There's a couple of general tips for, if you're tweeting or if you're having a caption, or if you're, including text in a Word doc or something like that. So the first thing would be to include links and any sort of content that's not, just plain text at the end of the message or at the end of the text, because if a screen reader is, reading it out, it'll go through every single word in the link before it actually gets to the content, so it's easier to understand. So in the example of the not accessible one, you can see that the link is just like kind of thrown in the middle, and at the end, on the second version, it's at the end, so you can kind of skip past that bit if it's at the end. Other things are camel case hashtags, which is basically just using a capital letter at the start of every word in a hashtag, because again, if it's a screen reader is using it, it'll just read out as one. It won't recognize that each new word is a word the way that you would if you're reading not accessible for screen readers, but the screen reader obviously won't see that, so it'll just give a kind of string of nonsensical words. And that's the same for links and things like emojis and exclamation points, or like overuse of things that aren't words. It'll just say like exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, and like that's not really needed if you're listening. It's kind of it just takes a lot longer to like engage with that information than it would if you're reading it. So that's just some general tips for content. And I think this is the last bit, but on document accessibility or digital accessibility. But a lot of people, but particularly for social media or presentations, they don't use high enough contrast colors, and then they use inaccessible fonts. So the general tips are obviously, you know, the colors need to be in high contrast with each other, and you can check this with online accessibility checkers. I think it's just look up contrast checker, things like that. But also you can turn the image into black and white, and if you can still see it, then if you can still see it clearly, then that's high contrast. The second thing is the font. So the best fonts are sans serif, which is the ones on the bottom. It just means basically they don't have any sort of additional like legs coming out of them or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of some general tips on that, but there's more, it goes into more details in the booklet. And then just general documents. So this would be like Word documents, PDFs, and presentations, which is probably, I'd say, in everyone's job. This comes up and in every operation. So things like font, using sans serif font and ensuring that it's size 12 at least. Descriptive links. This is an important one. So a lot of the time, links, particularly on a website, will say like click here, or find out more here, things like that. But it's important to describe what the link is going to bring you to, because again, if you're a screen reader user and you maybe want to just click through links because you're trying to go back to find out like a link you heard earlier, if you are going through that and it just goes click here, click here, click here, you're not going to know what each one leads to, and then you're not going to have to get into every single one of them. So say it's click here to find the disability service website. If you just hyperlink click here, you're not going to know what it is. But if you say click here or find more on the disability service website and link the disability service website bit, they'll know, if that makes sense. Using heading style, so that's, you know, say like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 in a document, so that people can navigate through the document either on screen readers or just in general, particularly for longer documents. High contrast colors, I talked about that already. Tagging your PDFs, I do this on Adobe Acrobat, but there's other ways of doing it too, and that just means making sure that it's all in the right order, that the behind the scenes is in the same order as you would read it yourself. So, you know, say if it was this one, that document accessibility is read out first, and then it goes into sans serif font and around, because it doesn't always pick up on that. Then alt text, and avoiding using all caps and using bold to emphasize text, because that's more accessible for multiple different people, and just in general, it generally looks better in a document. So that's, I know there's a lot of information, but it's all in the booklet, and I wanted to give you the chance to even talk to each other about what, if there's any changes that you would make in your general, like in what you do in your role, because, you know, I know everyone does very different things after some of this information. So if you just want to talk even to the person beside you or the 2 people beside you just for 2 or 3 minutes and report back.
How do you do this?
You know what I mean? So like probably going around and like I built a service of like we're specifically like, you know, not talking to the head of the service to make it so scary, we're talking to like people that you see to like try and make it more human and like show you how to get there and everything like as it's captured and stuff. So it's like it's hard to know what to do. I think sometimes like you have to make like and try to figure out if there's a way for them to be something creative by screen readers. But I don't know if the screen readers are necessarily like read it anyway. Like you have to have text and everything that's in it.
Sorry, yeah, so does anyone have any changes that they'll make you want to start off with?
My main takeaway, sorry, just launching in, but I'm a terrible one for saying click here. And I send out the weekly wrap up every week, and so much people say, click here. So I'm definitely going to make a massive effort to change that.
Just on that, I sent Kate an email about that about a year ago and said, guys, you can't keep doing this. And she went, yeah, well, but unfortunately you kept on doing it. And I had no end to send another email.
Okay.
So I mean, and this is the thing, even with I'm trying to think who's, because you have accessibility tips each week, and it's like it is quite striking to see people being told to do this, and then in the actual thing itself. Sorry, not by any way, it's like pointing at you guys, because it is constantly over college.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing, and people don't understand why it's not the right thing to do. And when you kind of unpack it and say it's because it's just going to be reading out click here, and that's of no use to man or beast, then they actually realise why you shouldn't do that. So sorry to kind of jump in.
You could do a trial the screen reader here in one of the wrap-ups, and so people would know. Cause, I mean, most of us probably are not. I've probably never tried a screen reader. I've never tried a screen reader.
Yeah.
So what you said has made total sense now that I realise that.
Yeah.
So
you should advertise these in the wrap-up.
Yeah, I can share the recording of the slides.
Yeah, it'd be good to sort of get people to actually experience that.
And to know what that's the thing. It's when I was doing the stuff with the societies as well, it's kind of about explaining why, rather than just giving, you know, like a big long document and here's what you should do. So that's useful to know that you've picked up on it. Alice,
can I ask a question? So like when I make posts a lot of the time, like I'm having to put a lot of information like almost into the picture, so it's like a graphic with words and everything. So if I'm putting that in and someone's using a screen reader, do I need to like put an alt text that has all of the words that are in the post?
So I guess for those things it would be better to have like in the caption if there's a repeat of the information.
Yeah, I do repeat it in the caption as much as possible.
I'd say like if you don't want to kind of have the same thing being repeated again or twice, so including the key bits of information that aren't in the text would be important, or even just saying this is a graphic explaining the information in the caption.
Okay.
Because you know you're right, like for particularly for like infographics or things like that, it can be just very repetitive. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, is there anyone else, any questions or changes you'll make?
One really basic change, I realised that my emails are all 11 points instead of 12 points.
Yeah,
it's really simple, but
yeah, no, it's that I kind of sometimes it automates, particularly on Word, it just goes into 11 for some reason. But yeah, particularly it's kind of when I'm finishing a document, I'll just like check all of the accessibility things. There is on Microsoft Office, I meant to say, and so all the Word, PowerPoint, there's accessibility features. So you can have like an accessibility checker at the end of any document, and then it will just say, you know, this is 90% accessible, or here's the things to change. So that's a really useful thing if if you're probably not thinking about it when you're rushing to get something finished, but it's really, really easy to do.
Sorry, just a comment. I'd like to compliment you on your sensory information. I've got some with sensory issues, and it's very, very good.
Thank you. I mean, it's taken from the TCU Sense project for the most part, but it's a really, I think it's not really something I knew much about until I started reading about it, but it's a really
It's
massive
it gets lumped in with other things.
Yeah.
It's not recognized in and of itself, and that's why I think it's fantastic. So well done, really.
Thank you. Yeah,
And I like
that's
the surveys. Are you actually collecting data from that? Will you be publishing, or
what's this?
this is the one where they can go in and actually answer questions themselves, but their own sensory environment?
The
It's the
sensory
key of the
profile.
auditor, we are gathering data, so that there's an auditor on where people go in and tell us if there's issues with the rooms. It prints a report and we can talk with the states around the bird and stuff once we gather the data.
Yeah. One thing I will say is the new buildings are fantastic sensory wise. Like, this is gorgeous, but the older buildings, the legacy buildings, there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue with Trinity as well. Even for physical access, for sensory access, it can be, there's only so much you can do, but there are small things you can change, even like closing the window or having different furniture. So
Yeah, like the library has done significant work on improving the sensory issues, and AR help desk is a really good example. If you're looking, I think Trish is here. If you want to see the level of investment that's gone into making the experience, I don't know if you want to talk about it, Trish, but what?
Yeah, so we had a room off the service desk that was pretty much just a storage kind of room office, and one of our staff members actually attended a training session that the disability service did on dealing with students with sensory issues. So we decided it was a good idea to create a space where students could go to if they needed some quiet time, or just like the AR services can be extremely busy, especially at peak periods. There can be like queues of hundreds of people. So we have this room, this quiet room, has the rocking chair, has the bean bag, has a table and chairs if they want to sit down, has the lovely new moss art walls now. Really nice. So it's a really nice space, and it's getting a lot of use by students. It's proven very popular. Anyone's welcome to come and have a look at it.
Is that space for them to wait, or to be to have their interaction?
Either or, so they can go if they just want to kind of just get some quiet time for themselves. If they want to meet with somebody private, we can go into that room with them as well. So
yeah, no, it's a great example. The library as well is a really good one, where there's these rooms people can go off and kind of break away from the main section of the library.
I think sometimes though, like we've all made progress, I think, but we're still kind of siloed in a way, and it's just bringing it all together. I think the TCU Sense app is brilliant. People can find different places and find match it to their requirements. So I don't know, I think there needs to be, first of all, more training between the departments, and for example, even the attic area, which is fantastic services and resources. I think we could all benefit from maybe like little videos or something, just showing us how particular machines work, from the perspective of a student coming in, how that would change the appearance of something, like little nuggets that would kind of help us to understand as well, even if it wasn't possible to have training laid on for us at certain times, because we constantly need to kind of keep up to date with their experience and how they interact with us, because I think there's a bit of a disconnect still. We're all trying to achieve something, but as we've seen, working together actually is a much better idea. So I think the training bit definitely, if that could be improved, would be great for all of us.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I think it's a good point, because I feel like in our office we don't always know how students interact with the library, so it'd be good to get that kind of, or the library anywhere, like it's good to kind of link in. Hopefully having the information in the booklets will help a bit, but
That's
I
really
think
good.
that Trinity specific information, I get what you mean.
I think it's often useful to see examples of good practice as well. Like, so even this is a document which is accessible. This is a room which is quiet, and that kind of thing. Just if you make it tangible, you're like, oh, I can see how this would work in my space.
Yeah, I think people think it's like a massive change up to make, but it's usually pretty small and very achievable. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the to hear. Can you talk more about the right way to?
Yeah.
I would like, if I'm writing an email and say I'm linking to something, I tend to just highlight it and hyperlink the actual text itself.
Yeah.
Like, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess, the specific email you're sending.
Yeah.
Like say if I was sending an email being like, here's the disability inclusion toolkit, I'd highlight disability inclusion toolkit. But if it was like, I'm trying to think of an example. Say, here is a wayfinding video to find the space.
Because if like a person's relying, they can't see the screen, they're relying on here. How do they know which bit I've highlighted? How do they know it's clickable?
So the screen reader will tell them that it's a link, if that makes sense. So it's important. The main thing is just that if you were just reading that, if you just got that piece of information isolated, you'd know what it was going to bring you to, if that makes sense. But they'll know that it's a link if it's hyperlinked, if that makes sense. Yeah, and they'll also know, say, if it was like bold or italics or a heading or something like that. That all comes through the screen reader.
Where can I find that?
So they're on the Disability Service website, but I will send the link again.
Rachel did all the drawings.